Now, though, very happy to have back on. Since April, he was long time. Dr. John Gartner, psychologist, widely published in journals and books. He lives and practices clinical psychology in New York and Baltimore, and founder of Duty to Warn, an association of mental health professionals warning us about Donald Trump. Dr. Gartner, nice to see you again, my friend.
Hey, you've missed out my most important qualification, that I'm the co-host of the Shrinking Trump podcast.
Oh, the shrinking. That's right. You send me emails about the Shrinking Trump podcast. Sorry, before we run out of time at the end, I'm going to ask you to tell people more about it, the Shrinking Trump podcast. And I wish it was literally shrinking, but you're talking about shrinking in terms of analysis. So,
well, actually, it's a double entendre. It's a double entendre because, and this relates to the topic of your show tonight. The double entendre is that he is shrinking organically because, for one thing, he has cognitive impairment, and so his brain is shrinking, and so he is literally dissolving before our very eyes. We're watching it happen, watching him deteriorate in front of our very eyes.
That's interesting. The shrinking part there, I like that very much. So you were on in April. You were warning us then from yourselves' point of view, but also there are 500 plus licensed mental health professionals who were raising red flags about Donald Trump as exhibiting concerning signs. Can you remind people in April? I know it might be hard to go that far back in time exactly, but can you recall what you were warning us then in April?
Well, the line I was using a lot in April was, I'm saying, if he has dementia, which I believe that he did, and we talked about the diagnostic criteria, it's a deteriorating illness. And if I'm correct, I said, then look at Donald Trump today, because that's the best Donald Trump you're ever going to see, because he's only going to continue to get worse and worse. And actually, his rate of deterioration has accelerated, which is actually normal for the disorder. But now we really see him in a whole slide where we notice a difference even from week to week at how he's becoming more disorganized, gumming thoughts together, and then arguing that he does the weave, because he knows that people think he's tangential and disorganized and chaotic and incomprehensible. There is no weave. Okay, he's not weaving anything together. He is evidencing the thought disorder that goes with dementia. And I have to admit, Dean, this is where I did not correctly predict what was going to happen. I thought, what's it going to take, right, for America to finally give up on this guy? If he's on the stage literally babbling incomprehensibly, then will they believe us? Well, guess what? Apparently not. I used to jokingly say, does he have to wear a tinfoil hat before people realize he's too crazy to be president? And now I realize if he wore a tinfoil hat, all of his followers would start wearing tinfoil hats. I mean, they wear Kotex on their ears. They wear diapers. I mean, apparently he makes those things look cool.
He would sell tinfoil hats to his supporters. Not only would he get them, he'd be like, here's the Donald Trump tinfoil hat. I'll autograph it. There's the gold version, the platinum version. Like, that's what he would do. Everything is a way to make money. He still has that. So I was going to remind you that, and I'm glad you reminded us yourself, that in April, Dr. Gartner, because I wrote Substack articles, and even maybe one where I cited you for a CNN article, but that you said and predicted accurately that he would get worse. That wasn't, you didn't wish that on him. You told us, based on your expertise as a psychologist, when you see what appeared to be signs, and is dementia the right term to use? Just cognitive slide in April? And that it was going to get worse over time. So now, from a point of view, now you see him. What is there a clinical diagnosis that you can actually, with confidence, within a reasonable degree of medical certainty, as I used to say as a lawyer to doctors on the stand,
well, actually,
look at him and say there's a diagnosis?
Yes. Well, yes, and from a number of different angles. And I know you mentioned, we're going to talk later about the breakthrough New York Times article. The first thing we look for when we're diagnosing someone with possibly having dementia or some similar deteriorating brain disorder is a deterioration from their own baseline. So it's very important to know what the person's original level of functioning was, because look, some people start from higher up than others. Let's be honest. Okay. But if you're deteriorating relative to yourself, that's a sign that there's something organically going wrong with your brain. And that's what we're seeing in Donald Trump, which is that he used to be actually quite articulate. And speak in polished paragraphs. And if you look at film from him in the 80s, he was actually he was still a douchebag, but he was an articulate douchebag. and then
funny.
people have done studies, and they've done studies looking at his speeches in the 80s, looking at his speeches in like the teens, and looking at his speeches now. And what you're seeing is a pattern of clear deterioration at many levels, at many measures. His vocabulary is getting more primitive. He's repeating himself. He's using more superlatives. He's speaking at a lower grade level. He keeps going down grade levels in terms of his speech and his vocabulary. But now it's more than even, and he's showing these things called phonemic paraphasias, where someone starts a word and then can't pronounce it. So they just make up the ending. And he does this all the time, but he's starting to do it more and more often. You've probably seen it in some of these supercuts. And finally, what we're really seeing is a breakdown in his thinking, that his thinking is not logical, it's tangential. He's drifting from one sort of free association to another. I mean, the classic example, I mean, there's so many now, but the classic example is he's talking about, they're emptying out the mental institutions of their immigrants. And then he starts thinking about mental institutions, and he goes, anyone seen Silence of the Lambs? Now, why are we talking about Silence of the Lambs? Well, because it's a movie about mental institution. He was talking about mental institutions. Now he's thinking about anyone seen that movie about mental institutions. And then he starts talking about the late, great Hannibal Lecter, which is insane at many levels because as a fictional character, he can't be late, can't be dead. And also, why is he praising a serial killer? Because he's such a sicko. To him, that's a role model. But the point is that, so we see kind of the workings of his twisted, but also thought disordered mind. There's no real connection between, there's no weave here. Okay, this is really, and the other thing he does is he confabulates. And actually, this hides in plain sight because he's such a liar, right? That he makes up these stories, but the stories he's starting to make up are more and more bizarre, and more crazy, whether he's quoting Robert E. Lee and making up a quote about people, not fighting uphill, or talking about sharks and electrocution. He's making up stories. Some of them are for the purpose of lying, but some of them are because he really doesn't know what's going on. And that's one of the things that also happens when people start to lose their grip on reality. He doesn't even know, he thought Obama was president. He kept saying Obama was president. He said it 7 times.
Yep.
He kept saying he was running against Joe Biden for 6 weeks. I mean, this is the sign of somebody who really is having a gross deterioration in their short-term memory, that he can't remember that there's a change in the presidential candidate. And it's not just that. He's showing other memory problems.
Gartner.
He's showing other memory problems. Writers who come to interview him say he doesn't recognize them the next day.
That was in the New York Times. The New York Times article was good in one way, but it was so unimpressive the way it was written. It did not shame the other parts of corporate media to cover it. And I think that was by design in a way. I could be wrong because the New York Times doesn't have a good track record this election cycle. But the New York Times about 10 days ago, and I talked about it on the show, did write an article titled "Trump's Speeches Increasingly Angry and Rambling Reignite the Question of Age." It's not the question of age, folks. It's the question of a cognitive decline and potentially dementia. It's not, I don't care what his age is. Dr. Fauci was older and sharper than this guy there's no debating. But in the article, they rightly noted that Trump appears more frequently, quote, confused, forgetful, incoherent, or disconnected from reality lately, adding, in fact, it happens so often these days that it no longer even generates much attention. To the corporate media, it doesn't, because they're sane-washing their golden goose. This is unbelievable to live through this time, to watch what's going on here. But when at least the New York Times wrote about it, it did not even prompt the discussion on cable news that it should have, or in other media outlets that it should have. When you read it, what was your reaction?
Well, actually, that was our top story on Shrinking Trump that week, because as our listeners know, we've been banging on the door of the corporate media, right, trying to get them to cover this story. When you had me on in April, I was sort of trying to barnstorm as best I could the media, right, to scream as loud as I could and as persuasive as I could that this was a story, right, that they were glossing over Trump's cognitive decline because they were so focused on Biden's aging. Once Biden got out of the race, and they sort of woke up and discovered, oh, there's another old person in the race. Of course, old doesn't mean the same thing for different people, but that's kind of the level at which they're writing.
Of course not. It's not about age.
It's not about it. It's
Right.
about cognitive decline. And so
Right.
what I liked about this article, well, first of all, the fact that this article got into the New York Times was a breakthrough, because we have been banging our heads against the door until they're bleeding, trying to get this into the New York Times and the Washington Post. So there was that. And also it had a lot of very comprehensive aspects. It talked about his tangential speech. It talked about his being incomprehensible. It talked about his making up bizarre stories. It talked about his being disoriented about who's president. It talked about him saying there was a wild crowd at the debate, even though there was no crowd at the debate, and he kept sticking with that. So I think they really did give you the flavor in the article of someone who really is out of reality and is cognitively deteriorating. And also they quoted some of the research about his cognitive deterioration that I was alluding to earlier, which is very important, because if you actually can empirically study and show that he is cognitively deteriorated on all of these measures, that's an objective measure of his deterioration.
And from a substantive point of view, I did think they did a good job in certain areas. From a point of view of trying to get other people in the media, they buried things that should have started with. In fact, they basically ignored the stat article. They cited to it, but they didn't go through the stat article from August, which I talked about on my show at great length and wrote about.
It's a great article.
Where
very important.
A group of experts went through and even used words like they didn't say diagnosis, but they said it's potentially Alzheimer's. It could be mood changes. It could be, but there were red flags of potential dementia there. They just sort of strung that aside. And then they interviewed people doing both sides. They asked some people, like the author who's writing the book about The Apprentice, who interviewed him 6 times, went back a 5th time or 6th time after just seeing him about a year and a half before. He had no idea. Trump had no idea who the guy was, started repeating the same stories. This guy had been there over the years, talking to him all the time about this book. That should have been the lead of the story. That would have jarred people. They would have been like, what is going on? But also they talked to Trump's staffers. He's fine. His lawyer. You can't both sides a medical issue. He's got cancer. No, his neighbor said he doesn't have cancer, so he can't have cancer. That's not how it works. It's a medical issue. You should just talk to mental health professionals like yourself and others. And if 2 different doctors go, look, I think it could be dementia, and they're going, it's not. That's a fair both sides. Not like his former lawyer said he's great. Are you kidding me? His former lawyer who wants more business from him? Stop that bullshit. To me.
But also the way they've been interviewing professionals is they've interviewed professionals who don't want to give a professional opinion. That's the way they've been doing it. So, right? Because of the Goldwater rule, which we've talked about. So in other words, they can look like they're quoting doctors, and the doctors say, hey, it could be anything. We would have to do extensive testing. Otherwise, it could be normal aging. It could be cognitive decline. Who knows? As if there's no signs or symptoms that we can observe and make some sense of. So the people like me who say, no, actually, I'll connect the dots for you. They don't let people like me on, except on your show.
I pitch you to MSNBC producers. I'm not even kidding. I've told more than one they should have you on. And you've not been on, which says something.
And you're not the first. And you're not the first one to pitch me.
It's the gatekeepers.
It's the gatekeepers. My point is they do know. In other words, it's not like they don't know that there's a group of us out there who have this point of view and can speak to it. As you say, the gatekeepers have made a decision not to let any of those people on the air.
Yep. That's
or in the New York Times or the Washington Post.
My whole point, and I was on my friend Jill Weinbank's podcast today talking about this very issue. My point is not to have me, Dean Obeidallah, a political pundit / comedian, on talking about the mental health issues of Donald Trump. It's having panels with people like yourself and other professionals to talk about, and you could say, I can't give a diagnosis because I didn't talk to him, but here are the red flags consistent with dementia.
Absolutely.
And people go like, oh my God, this is really alarming. And they could say, could you really say a diagnosis without speaking to him? And you might say, look, it's hard to give a full diagnosis, but he checks every box. The same way I can say he's a fascist, because I can go through academically what fascism is, what fascist leaders do, and how Donald Trump has checked those boxes. So is it relevant? Because the New York Times didn't include this. I interviewed Fred Trump III, his nephew, last month when he was talking about his book. And he was a very nice guy. And he was close to Donald until 2021. They had a falling out that late. Like he was with him forever. And I said, what did you see about Donald's cognitive issues. And he said, look, dementia, I'm reading, quote, dementia runs in the family. He said, Donald said, oh, my father was tip-top until the end. He goes, I can assure you that was not the case. I know when I saw my grandfather. I know what I saw in Donald's older sister, my Aunt Marianne, who in the end had dementia. And so did Donald's cousin, John Walters, had dementia. That should have been the New York Times article. That, to me, is relevant family history, that his father and his sister both had signs of extreme cognitive decline where they thought it was dementia, and the cousin as well.
Well, the one thing you'll never see in the New York Times, I used to say I could go to my grave happily if I can ever see in the New York Times the question, does Donald Trump have dementia? As you pointed out, the article used the euphemistic word of aging after saying, his cognitions are scrambled like eggs, raising the issue of aging. Well, excuse me, I'm old and my brain isn't scrambled like eggs. Don't tell me it's aging.
No, absolutely not. And when I speak of Trump, I am not at all saying people who are his age, 78, are all demented or have these issues. This is Donald Trump. Dr. Fauci, who was 4 or 5 years older when he left office doing his job, was like 80, 81, the sharpest guy around. I know an acting teacher here in New York. He passed away now during COVID. He was 93 years old, still teaching acting, sharp as a whip. It's about the person. Donald Trump's dementia, it could have started at a younger age, to be honest. It's not about the normal part of aging. There's something different here. So I want to play a few clips for you of Donald Trump recently. And most are short, but one's a little longer. One's over a minute. But here is one. And these are all recent. And you tell us what you're hearing. So, Matt, let's play clip number 4, please.
Just come up. They want to do things like no more cows and no windows in buildings. They have some wonderful plans for this country. Honestly, they're crazy.
That was from this weekend. He said Democrats want to ban cows and ban windows. What is that? It could be lying, or it could be something deeper. And let me play one more clip. And this was from a few days before that, clip number 5.
I have more complaints on grocery. The word grocery, it's sort of simple word, but it sort of means like everything you eat. The stomach is speaking. It always does. And I have more complaints about that bacon and things going up double, triple, quadruple.
What are you hearing there in those kind of clips?
You're hearing someone whose thinking process is breaking down, right? So he's talking about whatever the cost of food and, okay, that's the ostensible political issue. But then he goes, grocery, and then he starts trying to think of what the word grocery means. Like there's sort of like an absence there, right? Like grocery, it's like, like everything you eat. Like he's struggling with the word grocery, right? And then he says something about your stomach, and that seems like a very odd, but and it's like an association. Remember, we're following a loose association, not an association of linear thought, but more like a sort of a dream-like primary process free association. So that grocery makes him think about his stomach and stomachs, and I forgot exactly what he said about the stomach, and then and then sort of weaves
stomach
back to prices are going up. The stomach is talking.
Bacon.
The stomach is, and it wants bacon. And the other thing about the no windows and the no whatever, he's always been a liar, right? But now that his thinking is becoming more flat, it's becoming more bizarre, black and white, extreme. You know what I mean? Instead of saying, oh, for energy efficiency, they want to kill the economy, right? That's sort of what he's trying to say. These green heads, are trying to kill the spirit of enterprise here. Instead, he's saying they want to have no windows. It's like he's sort of giving like a kindergarten version of new right politics. You know what I mean? Like the anti-environmental talking points are kind of more like a child who would like take a crayon and draw them.
And, is it fair to say that he can still deliver a speech from a teleprompter and read the words? It's when he stops reading that you see this. Like he is still able to. And for example, there's something you said to me in April that stuck with me, that the mind, when you hear silence, it wants to fill it. Like it doesn't like silence, especially, I guess maybe, I don't know if it's all of our brains, or our brains are a little bit more challenged. And here he is yesterday in Arizona. It's not a long clip again, but he goes off the teleprompter and he's just filling it with words, like the same words. This is just yesterday, folks, in Arizona, clip number 7.
Also, we have many Asians in our room. We have some incredible people in our room. We have so many that we just can't. But we have some people. We have some people in our room that I'm not going to mention because they fully understand why. Because I don't have time. But Rob,
well, first of all, that's a phonemic paraphasia. That's not Azerasians is not a word, right? So that's another phonemic paraphasia. I'm not. Was he trying to say Asian Americans? I'm not exactly sure even what he was trying to say, but
I think Arizonans. I think
Arizonans.
But we're not sure. We're all because he's in Arizona.
Okay,
so they're somehow combined.
They're Arizasians
and Asia.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing.
So he's made up
he's making up
race.
words. They're not. He's making up words. Right. They're not real words.
I'm choking on.
But that's something that people who don't. Something people who don't have brain damage don't do. And I think that's important to understand.
I was drinking water. Right. Okay. That's what I wanted you to articulate and expand on.
Because in other words, look, forgetting names all the time. I forget names all the time. There was something I was going to say and I forgot the name of the person I want to talk about and I didn't get back to it. That happens all the time. When I introduced Brooklyn Dad, I mispronounced his name, because I'm old and I have trouble with foreign sounding names, I have to learn new sounds. Brooklyn it's Dad, hard at my age, right?
I know.
Mm-hmm. But the thing is that's different. Okay. That's different than making up words or starting a word and not being able to finish it and then just, saying Christmas instead of Christmas or mishes instead of missiles. That's something that only people with brain damage do.
So dementia, just so people understand, is dementia a form of brain damage?
Absolutely. It's a deteriorating brain illness. There can be different causes and there's different forms of dementia. And there's been some debate about he has Alzheimer's in his family, but some people think his symptoms look like more frontotemporal dementia. But it's all about a deteriorating organic process in the brain where the cognitive processes start to break down and they only go in one direction. They keep sliding downhill.
Let's play a longer clip from last week, which really got a lot of attention and it deserved to. Mm-hmm. And he was speaking at the Detroit Economic Club about economic issues. And then this happened. Clip number 6, please.
A very big plant. In many countries, they do that. And then all of a sudden you hear that they're leaving Milwaukee or they're leaving wherever they may be located. It's very sad to see it. And it's so simple. I mean, this isn't like Elon with his rocket ships that land within 12 inches on the moon where they wanted to land. Or he gets the engines back. That was the first I realized. I said, who the hell did that? I saw engines about 3-4 years ago. These things were coming, cylinders, no wings, no nothing. And they're coming down very slowly, landing on a raft in the middle of the ocean someplace with a circle. Boom. Reminded me of the Biden circles that he used to have, right? He'd have 8 circles and he couldn't fill them up. But then I heard he beat us with the popular vote. I don't know. Couldn't fill up the 8 circles. I always loved those circles. They were so beautiful. They were so beautiful to look at. In fact, the person that did them, that was the best thing about the level of that circle was great. But they couldn't get people, so they used to have the press stand in those circles because they couldn't get the people. Then I heard we lost. Oh, we lost. No, we're never going to let that happen again. But we've been abused by other countries. We've been abused by our own politicians.
By the way, Elon Musk never landed on the moon, but that, just to fact check that part, there was a lot there in a minute and 28 seconds. That was literally a minute and 23 seconds. What do you see?
I'm glad you played the whole clip because part of the reason this message doesn't get out is they play smaller clips. And really, when you hear the whole meandering mess, you realize how completely lost he is. Nobody could tell you what those circles mean. They seem to change in the story. First, he's talking about engines, and engines make him think of circles, but then Biden had circles, and then Biden was in the circles, but he couldn't fill up the circles. So how could he win the election? Because of the circles weren't full. I mean, this is really like the kind of conversation you would have with your aunt in the nursing home. Honestly, right? And you say, that's okay, Auntie, the circles, whatever, sure, whatever, how's the pudding? I mean, this is
when you hear, Dr. Gartner, so people are listening, is there any doubt based on your experience and expertise and years of work in this field that Donald Trump has some form of dementia?
There's absolutely no doubt. And also, we have had many guests who are much greater experts than I. I mean, this dementia is not my area of specialization. We've had neuropsychologists, neuropsychiatrists on the show who have gone through their analysis and presented him. We've even had one of a team of neuropsychologists present him as if they were presenting a case. Based on the data that they have. They were sort of doing, rounds, in the hospital, and Mr. T was just one of their patients. How would they describe his presentation? We had Vince Greenwood on our show, who actually did a study of his speeches earlier in life and later in life. He also did Biden, by the way, and he looked at 9 measures of dementia and showed that Trump went up dramatically on all 9 measures, and Biden went up on none. Biden went up on measures of aging. He was quieter, slower, but Trump was showing some of these formal characteristics that I've been talking about. So it's really not just me saying it, or that I got a petition with hundreds of doctors to say it. It's that when you really talk to the experts and the super experts, it's even more apparent.
I'm chatting with Dr. John Gartner, the founder of Duty to Warn. So you mentioned in April that Donald Trump would degrade, like he would decline in time. And you were right. We see it now. If Trump were to win, the added pressure of being president, what would you predict we would see then?
It would be such a dark comedy. If any of your viewers are old enough to remember the Woody Allen movie Bananas.
Sure. I love, I've watched many Woody Allen.
I grew up with Woody Allen. Well, so for the people who don't know, through some weird comedic circumstance, he ends up becoming the dictator of some South American country after a revolution that he got sucked into accidentally because he was trying to date a girl, of course. And then once he becomes the dictator, he starts dressing like kind of like Castro, and but he also gets drunk with power and starts making these crazy arbitrary proclamations. So he's standing on the balcony, militaristically going, from now on, everyone will wear their underwear on the outside of their clothes. From now on, the official language of Bolivia is Swedish. From now on, and of course, someone tries to assassinate him because this is crazy. A madman is, I think about that comedic scene of, from now on, except it wouldn't be funny, and it wouldn't be, he wouldn't be putting it on, because we would have someone like your demented Aunt Trudy, who thinks that there's that Biden didn't fill up the circles, who can't think in charge of the country. Someone who literally has the most difficult executive job in the world. Their frontal lobes are essentially fried, so that all of their executive functioning is completely kaput, and yet they have the hardest executive job in the world. I mean, the irony is insane.
Would it make it easier if Donald Trump were to continue to deteriorate like that others around him could manipulate him? And
of course,
get him to sign legislation and do whatever they want, whatever their goals are?
They would. Absolutely. They would. And, look, he's already so malleable. Elon Musk comes in and says, I'll give you $45 million. And he realizes, I could make money in crypto. Okay, now I'm the crypto president, and so, just imagine any corrupt businessman or any hostile foreign power could, it's sort of like, when people die and they get them to sign over everything in the will, I could just, just sort of convincing him to sign over all of the American goods, and business and resources to them,
Right. You could have a document where Elon Musk somehow got control of NASA. Well, Donald Trump signed a document, give him control of NASA. It's right here in writing. Everyone, he did an executive order.
The private
for $1, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Vice President Harris was asked over the weekend about Trump's mental acuity on the runway. So you hear the jets behind her. It's a short clip. I want to play it for you and get your reaction about what more do you want someone like Vice President Harris or her surrogates to be saying about this issue to bring it to the forefront? Because that's the only way to get around the gatekeepers, is if the Democratic nominee for president begins talking. So here's what she did say about it. And she sort of began to lean into it, but then kind of step back. Clip number 8, please, Matt.
What do you think about President Trump's mental acuity and whether it's declined since, say, his 2016 campaign?
I invite the public to watch his rallies and be the decision maker on his acuity. And you will see in his rallies how he goes off on tangents, how he is not focused on the needs of the American people with solutions to the issues that concern them the most.
So she gave a good answer. She's like, I invite them to watch his rallies, which no one's going to watch his 2 hours of meandering garbage. But is there something more that you would love to see Vice President Harris say that could amplify this issue and cause the media to have to cover it?
She could have punched a little harder there. I agree. I will say, though, in general, we've been talking about this a lot on the Shrinking Trump show, as we've been raging about how, and you were really right to put it together, how the press has been avoiding this issue. Once the Harris campaign started talking about it, they couldn't avoid it, right? It's very significant that that New York Times article came out after Harris started breaking the barrier of talking about his cognitive decline. You know, I'm very active on Twitter, as you know, and the Kamala HQ, their Twitter account, is incredibly deft and incredibly fast moving and incredibly hard hitting. And they ridicule his cognitive decline all the time. And she ridiculed him in the debate, talking about how he's, talking about, sharks and batteries. And also she kicked him in the crowd size, which is what got him to disorganize, I think, and start talking about cats and dogs. So, while we were really frustrated with the Biden campaign, right, because they weren't punching back at all, I think the Harris campaign overall, I would give them an A for how they have managed to make her look presidential and yet incisively point out his inadequacies, including his cognitive inadequacies, and how they've really gone back and forth between being able to be joyous, but also being able to punch back. So I think they actually get credit for actually, as you point out, making this an issue that has to be talked about.
And they're the only ones that can go around the gatekeepers because they can set the agenda. If the Democratic nominee, and Donald Trump does it all the time. I mean, as a Republican, he makes issues that no one in the media wants to talk about. He'll double and triple down, and they have no choice but to cover it while he's the candidate, or if he becomes president again, then they'll be forced to cover it even more. One last thing I want to play, and that's from this weekend where Donald Trump talked about the enemy from within. Because part of this is like the bumbling, nice-mannered grandpa who doesn't know what's going on, but that's not Donald Trump. He is a sinister, devious, dangerous person. And I want to get your reaction to him chatting with Maria Bartiromo, and she is first talking about the threat of migrants. That's their big thing, but he pivots to say the real threat's within. So here's clip number 2, please, Matt.
I think the bigger problem is the enemy from within, not even the people that have come in and destroying our country. By the way, totally destroying our country. The towns, the villages, they're being inundated. But I don't think they're the problem in terms of election day. I think the bigger problem are the people from within. We have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics. And I think they're the big, and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military, because they can't let that happen.
So, there are moments of lucidity with him, but what else do you hear there? This lack of inhibition to just say whatever is on his mind, to be as vicious as possible, calling for violating U.S. law. What is your reaction to that?
Well, I think, you've been talking about how he's a fascist. He is a complete and total fascist. He is the American Hitler wannabe in every way. Just substitute immigrants for Jews, and you have the American Hitler. And so the vileness, for example, which they talk about immigrants. Now here he's talking about his political enemies, obviously, right? Who, people like you and me, right? Who are on the enemies list. And, I was talking to Brooklyn Dad on our show, and he said, well, I don't know what I'm going to do if Donald Trump wins. I said, I know what you're going to do. He said, what? Time.
We don't know what it's going to, if Trump were to get in, because in that interview, he talked about Adam Schiff as being one of the enemies of America. Before you came on, I laid out from a legal point of view, being a lawyer, the Supreme Court decision in July, which is very clear that Donald Trump's, one of the areas his absolute immunity isn't talking to his DOJ and telling them who to investigate, who to prosecute. It's unbelievable and irresponsible. The Supreme Court gave that as an example.
I know.
But John Roberts, they knew what they were doing. So you have a man who has mental deterioration here, a dementia, brain damage, whatever, a lack of inhibition with a natural default to cruelty and viciousness, who will have complete immunity to send DOJ to go after who he wants. And
That's right.
this is a recipe, I would say, for how a republic can come to an end.
Oh, no. If he wins, it's over. The republic is over. I'm not being dramatic. I just don't see, I can't see any way that it could survive.
That's well put, Doctor. So tell us about the podcast in case people want to hear more about it and they can follow it, because it's really, you send me some things and I share them on Twitter. We refuse to call it X. So tell us about the shrinking.
Yeah, I refuse to call it X
Trump.
too. Yeah, shrinking Trump. Well, it's me and another psychologist, someone who's actually been a good friend since childhood, but we don't mention that on the show. But we have a kind of a friendly banter, teamwork like you can only have with your old friends, right? But we do a lot of what you've just done is go over tapes, and discuss them from a psychological point of view, pointing out the symptoms and signs of illness, both cognitive illness, but also, of course, we also talk a lot about his malignant narcissism, which is what underlies his fascism, right? All of these fascistic leaders have malignant narcissism. Hitler did. In fact, the term malignant narcissism was based on Hitler. Erich Fromm, who escaped Hitler, is the one that developed that diagnosis. And it's got, as you say, the cruelty. It's got sadism, it's got paranoia, it's got narcissism, and it's got psychopathy. So they're criminals, they're paranoid, and they're grandiose, and they revel in cruelty and destruction. They're really the most dangerous characters that exist on planet Earth, according to Erich Fromm. They're the concatenation of evil, he called them. So yeah, people who are evil can get demented too. So he wants to destroy America. He just can't remember who's president.
But if he's president, he'll
do it.
We don't even want to imagine.
It'll be the end. It'll be the end. And you're right. He's so disinhibited that he's basically spilling the beans, right? And that is part of the disinhibition of dementia. You just say it out loud. So he's saying the quiet parts aloud, but of course that's also been part of his technique to desensitize us. But there's been these interesting articles about how Trump supporters don't believe he's going to do what he says. They think that's just bluster and exaggeration. But of course, you and I know he's literally, this is like Project 2025. They're literally writing the playbook, as Tim Wall says. No one wrote a playbook that they weren't planning to use for a total fascist remaking of America. It is the end. It is the end of the 1776 America. It's the end of the constitutional republic that Alexander Hamilton and Washington, all those people put together. It would be a fresh start with a strong man in charge of with holding all the levers of power. It would be do any of your listeners think it wouldn't be the end?
I can poll all of them. Anyone on our side would say it's going to be the end, or it's going to be the beginning of a big backslide as the democracy gets eroded, to make us more like a Hungary, where you have the charade of elections, but in reality, you can never win.
Well, he wants Viktor Orban to be
like that. I don't want to try to make light to it. Like I think they would put people would be in prison. There's no doubt. And his supporters who say, I don't think he's being literal, are the same ones who would cheer if he sent DOJ or the military to silence his critics, because that's what motivates them. They are on board for, be it if it's the white supremacy or it's the cruelty, the meanness, or the tax cuts and all of that, like the Elon Musk and the oligarchy that he will usher in, where the oligarchs will make decisions on policy. Yep. That's what, we're going into a horrific, a gilded age in the worst example of it from the time of the robber barons. But now you're going to have a president who is vicious, vindictive, and will do anything. I mean, there's nothing we could have.
And is beholden to Russia.
And is beholden to Russia. Really no limit.
And is beholden to Russia. Let's not forget. I mean, Putin is the boss of bosses.
Yep.
We would just be joining the crime family.
I agree. I just interviewed Christopher Steele last week for Salon about his new book, and we talked bluntly about he has every reason to believe in his years from working at someone who used to be at MI6, which is like their CIA, that Russia has something on him. They don't know what it is. He's not sure, but there's no other explanation based on his years of decades in the world of intelligence gathering.
Dean, let me make it simpler. Let me make it simpler for you. Okay. I don't think it's that they have something on him. I don't think that he's a useful idiot. I don't think that they're just babying him into thinking he's in charge. It's like, you don't have to be paranoid to say those guys wearing pinstripes are working together, right? They're called the New York Yankees. Okay.
Right.
The point is that they are a team. It's that simple. Okay. It's not a complex. It's not that the pitcher has something on the first baseman or the first baseman thinks he's working for Cincinnati. They understand that they are a team of people working in collaboration. You could call it collusion. You could call it a conspiracy. You could call it conspiracy theory, but they are a team working to accomplish the same goal and to defeat the same enemy. And we are the enemy. America is the enemy. Yep. American democracy is the enemy. And the oligarchs, the Elon Musks, the Vladimir Putins, the Viktor Orbans, the Donald Trumps, they're on a team. They understand they're on a team. Why can't we understand they're on a team? If they wore red uniforms with their name and a number, would that help us understand?
That's a good point, Doctor. Well, Doctor, it's great chatting with you. And, I'm going to please keep sending me the emails about the podcast, and I'll share it all the time. And I'll send you my articles. I'm going to write a new one for Substack tomorrow, quoting you about exactly what we went through, because I want more people to understand this is not a game. This is not political spin. I'm talking about Donald Trump's mental health issues, because experts like yourself and others you quote are raising red flags. And I believe our fellow Americans should know that and understand the stakes of electing someone as commander in chief who could be manipulated, who is a sadist, who is cruel, or has no inhibitions whatsoever to what he might do. So, Doctor, nice chatting with you, my friend. Have a great night.
Always. I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.